IVM.
Hi, I'm Utsav, a behavior researcher by training and a slow traveler by passion. Postcards from Nowhere is a travel podcast where I condense a decade of travel experiences and explore not just the where, but also the why and how to travel. My stories emerged from slow traveling the less explored parts of the world: Bosnia and Herzegovina, Armenia, Uzbekistan, and even China. At the end of each story, I give practical tips and new ideas about how to travel better. This week, I take you to Kargil, the line of control, and to one of the most unique museums you would ever see, in a village abandoned for the last 30 years.
आपका नाम बताइए।
मेरा नाम मोहम्मद बाकर है।
मोहम्मद बाकर जी, तो आप कहाँ रहते हैं?
मैं यहाँ इस गांव में रहता हूँ, हुंदुरमान गांव, हुंदुरमान ब्लॉक नाम इसका गांव का नाम है।
अच्छा।
तो यहाँ पे रहता हूँ।
आप यहीं पैदा हुए थे?
हम यहीं पैदा हुए थे सर।
अच्छा, और आपके बाप दादा सब यहीं से हैं?
मेरा सब बाप दादा सारा यहाँ से है। हाँ सर।
अच्छा, तो 1999 में आप यहीं पे थे?
99 में हम यहाँ पे थे, इसी गांव में थे। तो इससे पहले जब 71 का वार हुआ,
हाँ।
उससे पहले जो 47 से 71 तक ये पाकिस्तान के अंदर में था ये गांव।
Imagine that your village, a place that generations of your family called home, changes hands overnight. All your life, you lived in Pakistan, and then suddenly, in a matter of a few hours, you are living in India. This is the story of Hundarman, the last village along the line of control in Kashmir, and its museum of memories. About 12 kilometers from Kargil, the historic town which gave name to the 1999 war between India and Pakistan, lies the village of Hundarman. We chartered a rickety Maruti Omni with a young, stylish-looking driver, Mohammed Deen, to take us to the village. The drive up to Hundarman is not for the faint-hearted, for it's a dirt track with a steep 1,000-foot drop on one side. If you have driven along Himalayan roads, you know how close you drive to the edge sometimes, and how painfully slow progress can be. It took us almost 45 minutes to get to a vantage point just before Hundarman, where with the aid of powerful binoculars, we could see a place which we had all read about only in newspapers: the line of control, or LOC. I'll admit that seeing LOC was a surreal feeling. The binoculars allowed us to see the bunker positions of Indian and Pakistani soldiers, with one of our bunkers being so high up in the mountains that they appeared as tiny white dots to the naked eye. It felt absurd to be able to spot a Pakistani soldier just going about his day in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. The person manning the binoculars informed us that just like us, the Pakistanis keep an eye on India sitting atop a dargah in POK. And for some strange reason, I expected LOC to be an actual line which divided Kashmir, but all one could see was one mountain indistinguishable from the other, and the river Sarayu flowing between the two paths without a check dam, just like it had for thousands of years. To the naked and the uninformed eye, the two were indistinguishable. But things were very different for Hundarman and Mohammed Bakar.
फिर इसके बाद जब इंडिया ने 71 में जब लड़ी हुआ तो उसमें इंडिया ने कैप्चर किया।
हाँ।
तो इसमें से आधा परिवार उधर रह गया जब पाकिस्तान चला गया।
अच्छा।
तो आधा यहाँ पे रह गया।
तो आपका भी आधा परिवार पाकिस्तान में है?
पाकिस्तान में हमारा कुछ रिश्तेदार उधर है, मामा है, इधर चाचा है, और कोई और बहुत से रिश्तेदार है हमारे।
अच्छा। तो कभी कुछ परमिशन मिल पाई जाके मिलने की, ऐसा कुछ हो पाया कभी?
अभी तक हमने कोशिश भी नहीं किया जब परमिशन लेने का।
अच्छा।
सिर्फ खातून की वजह से हमें उनका हाल पूछता हूँ।
अच्छा।
और अभी तो फोन से थोड़ा कभी-कभी बात हो
जाता होगा।
As Hundarman chained hands post the Indo-Pak War of 1971, Mohammed Bakar saw his family being separated by the border. The letters they send sometimes take weeks to deliver, even though the distance is only a few kilometers. And sometimes the letters don't even reach. But his experience is unique by no means. Our young stylish driver Mohammed Deen too had a similar story. Before the war, his grandfather would often buy goods in Kargil and sell them off to nearby villages. It was the life of a trader in a small town, until the war hit home. His grandfather was in what is now POK, but along with him was also his maternal uncle, who was well into his golden years. The grandfather, then a young lad, managed to return to Kargil but the old maternal uncle could not make it. I do not have the emotional courage to even imagine having to make a decision to leave your loved ones behind, not knowing what will become of them. To this day, Muhammadin and his family don't know the fate of the uncle. As for Muhammad Bakar, the 1971 war impacted Hundarman, and about 10 years later, the entire village moved out to an even higher altitude to create a new settlement. But things came to a head again in 1999.
99 में आप यहीं पे थे?
19 में हम यहीं पे थे, जो 99 के जो वार हुआ उस टाइम में हम यहीं पे थे। उस टाइम में हमारा सारा जो पढ़ाई थे वो सारा बेकार हो गया, और ये सारा खेतें हर चीज़ में हमारे पूरा नुकसान हो गया।
Muhammad went on to talk about those 2 months when the war was at its peak in 1999. The village is located at the bottom of 2 mountains, and at the time, 1 mountain each was in control of India and Pakistan. Both sides shelled each other non-stop, and caught in this crossfire were the villagers. He pointed towards one of the mountain slopes which was completely covered in mountain rubble, and he said that if you remove the rubble, there is a network of rooms where the entire village took shelter for 2 months. Ever since the village changed hands, Muhammad Bakar has been working with the Indian Army, hauling supplies for soldiers who have been stationed at bunkers. In those 2 months, he would step out in the middle of the night and carry out his duties, putting himself at risk of being killed. In the narratives of historic wars, as we document key events and turning points, what lies forgotten is the contribution of the local people. Have you ever imagined the time in 1999 when suddenly thousands of soldiers must have been rushed to the border? How did they have access to resources to survive the harsh climate at LOC? The region barely had motorable roads then, and even today, bulk of it can only be covered by mules or on foot. It's the people from the households of Kargil that stepped up and backed our army. And it was a realization that dawned upon me. You cannot win a war without the support of the locals. In the punishing mountainous terrain of LOC, Muhammad Bakar is not an outlier. He is the norm. The original village continues to be abandoned, except that you would still see people in it. Not locals, but tourists. The village has been converted into one of the most unique museums I've had the privilege of seeing. The Hundarman Museum of Memories.
म्यूज़ियम जब मेरा भाई है और वो उधर कारगिल में जो ये रूट्स का एक
रूट्स लद्दाख?
रूट्स है ना।
हाँ जी, हाँ जी।
उन्होंने कुछ हमें सजेशन बताया, फिर उसने हमें ये सारा चीज़ें हमें उन्होंने सेटल करके दे दिया। उन्होंने जब वहाँ से अहमदाबाद से कुछ
सेप्ट यूनिवर्सिटी से
वहाँ से कुछ लड़कियाँ सारे लाए, 10, 15, 20 तक था शायद। उन्होंने इसे को पूरा 10 दिन में सेटल करके दे दिया।
अच्छा, 10 दिन में हो गया पूरा ये सब तैयार?
हाँ, पूरा।
Spread across 3 galleries are objects of everyday life of the people who fled the village. On display, you would find containers of cherry blossom shoe polish and blades and razors from brands which no longer exist. One finds currency notes from the pre-independence era, cooking utensils made of mud, and the remnants of war, bullet casings and mortar shells. From more peaceful times, you would find a local version of the game of checkers, played with the nails of goats and sheep as coins. But nothing prepares you for that one exhibit that is tucked in the corner of one of the galleries. Photographs and documents left behind by the fleeing locals. They are written up in Urdu, and one can only imagine the hurry in which the people must have left, not even having the time to pick up their identification. I remember standing there numbly, looking at them, wondering what eventually became of those people. And like us city dwellers, the people in the villages and mountains have very strong bonds with their lands and their communities, for it forms their strongest identity. Living Hundarman was not only a material loss, but also a spiritual one. Maybe that is why, along with his responsibilities with the Indian Army, Muhammad Bakar is the proud guide of the Hundarman Museum. It's not a job, it's a never-ending fight to regain a sense of control, to retain a sense of belonging to a place he once called home. In the annals of the subcontinent, Hundarman may be a footnote, but to a few, it's a personal history, lived and relived infinitely. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to reach out to me, I am Utsav Memory on Twitter and YVTravel42 on Instagram.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On The Longest Constitution with Priya, find out what's obscene about obscenity and why artists and writers have been penalized for it. On Cyrus Says, Rochelle Rao joined Cyrus to talk about her amazing career in IPL and her comeback on The Kapil Sharma Show. Srinath Rangamani, design head at Swiggy, joins Kedar and Abhineet on Audio Gyan to take them through his design perspectives. Get all the updates regarding current immigration trends on Know Your Qanun when Amber is joined by Shoshana T. Green and Alexandra Cole, experts from Green and Spiegel. And on The Fighting Goat, Arjun and Somesh talk about the epic MMA fights of the decade, controversies, and the end of Pride FC. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week on the network, Seat Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quarter, CoinSwitch Kuber, and Intuit India. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Do you like true crime stories?
Do you like to learn about the people behind some horrible, awful crimes?
More specifically, women that may have committed these crimes.
Actually, Indian criminals that are women?
Then we'd like to welcome you to our podcast, Misconduct. My name is Raghavi.
And I am Nisha.
We cover themes like murder, dacoity, drug trafficking, financial fraud, kidnapping, and many more.
You can catch us every Wednesday on the IVM Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcast.